Are you looking to understand Baldur's Gate 3 before the game launches? Well, this is the right place for you. There are a lot of terms and concepts in Baldur's Gate 3 that may confuse new players to the genre, especially if you've never played D&D before or any tabletop RPG. Today I'm going to go over a lot of concepts in the game so that you have a good understanding of the systems that will be used in Baldur's Gate 3. Something unique to games derived from tabletop RPGs that many people may not be familiar with is AC or armor class, proficiency bonus, spell slots, skill checks, dice rolling, initiative, speed, HP or health points, weapons, and attributes themselves. As you can see, there is a lot of things in the game to go over. We'll start with explaining it as you would normally build a character, and the first thing that you're going to be doing when you're building a character is you're going to be looking at your attributes. You're going to be looking at strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. This is a current character that I've built from a game that I'm currently in right now, so we're going to kind of be basing everything off of this or modifying it a little bit just to show examples of what I'm talking about. The stats matter in what class that you choose. For example, this is a wizard class, but every stat is going to be different depending on what kind of class that you want to play. You're going to assign the stats or points that you have to put into your stats to make what you want. Certain classes focus on specific things, right? Like charisma is a big thing for bards. Fighters are usually strength or dex, and wizards being intelligence. For example, this is a wizard that focuses on intelligence. You'll distribute these stats when you make your character to what you want to be, which will, make your strength stronger or your weaknesses stronger, or you will just keep your weaknesses as weak as they can be and make your things that are important as strong. So for example, you might max out your int on a wizard, or you might max out your strength on a fighter and leave intelligence to the wayside, or leave strength to the wayside for a wizard. Strength increases how much you can carry, how your strength related checks and strength related weapon attacks are going to go. So when you have high strength, if you're using a weapon that is going to be using strength for your attack roll, you'll have a higher chance to hit. Dex is also related to dex weapons. Depending on the weapon that you use, it might be a dex-based weapon. For example, like a rapier, it can't really use strength as a rapier since it's a finesse weapon. So dex will do with dex-related hit rolls. It will increase AC or armor class, and we'll go over that a little bit later, and the associated skill checks as well. So just like strength and dex, we have specific skills that are related outside of combat that will get better if those stats are higher, like athletics or acrobatics. Con is related to HP or your health pool or health points. So every level you gain, depending on what your con bonus is, and we'll go over attribute bonuses in a moment, but depending on what your con bonus is, you'll have more HP the higher it is. Or when certain spells are done against you, depending on your saves for that skill, so saves are also dependent on your attribute points and your certain bonuses that you get from them, you might be able to save versus certain spells or conditions. It determines how many spells you can memorize if it is your casting attribute, your associated checks and saves, and your bonus to spells hitting. And this int will change. The same thing applies to wisdom and charisma if those are your spellcasting modifiers for a spellcasting class. So we'll go over the bonuses that you actually get from attributes. Bonuses that you get from stats increase in increments. So for example, here I'm 12 strength. I only have a +1, and I'm also 12 in dexterity, also a +1. But because I am 9 in wisdom, I'm at a -1, and because I'm at 12 charisma, I'm at 12. And intelligence is at +5 because it's at 20. So if you're at 10, you have 0. If you're below 10, every 2 points below that, so 9 and 8, you'd be at -1, and then 7 and 6, you'd be at -2, and then the opposite. If you're at 12 and 13, you'll be at +1, 14 and 15 +2, 16 and 17 +3, and so on and so forth, until you get to 20, which would put you at +5. An example I can use outside of the one that I have right here, because it's not a fighter, this is a wizard, is a fighter that has 15 strength at level 1 with a proficiency and a longsword, and we'll go over proficiency a little bit later, would get a +2 to hit from strength and +2 from proficiency, which will all go into your hit chance or your extra hit points when you go to do an attack roll versus someone. So the proficiency is going to be noted up here on your character sheet, and it will be notated in the game as well. So right now, because I'm a little bit higher level, I have a proficiency 3, but if I was lower level, I would only have a proficiency 2. Now earlier I talked a little bit about HP and health pools and how the attribute points affect how much HP you have if your con is higher. So for example, if we were to have 18 con, that means that we would have +4 on every time that we leveled up. We'd get an additional 4 HP. So if we were a fighter, for example, we would have a 10 HP pool that we could get. Anywhere from 1 to 10, depends on what you roll for your HP. And then you would get an additional 4 on top of that. Also, when you do level up your attributes to get to that next increment that increases it from, let's say, +3 to +4, every level previous to that, right? So let's say you had, at level 7, you had +3. So let's say you got max roll and you got 13 HP. And now at level 8, you leveled again, you got 14. Because you now have +4 con. That means at every level before that, right? The previous level you got 13, and the one before that, and that, and that. All of those levels before will now get that additional HP as well. So while you did get 13 in the previous level, it'll also go up by an additional 1 because now all these levels beforehand also get that bonus you had when you increased your con. The amount of HP that you get also does change from class to class. Specific classes have more HPs than others, like barbarians have 1d8 HP that they can get every level, or a total of 12 HP that they could get, and a wizard only has 6 HP that they can get every level, excluding the bonus that they get from con if they have a bonus for con. Now, if your con does go into the negatives, you do actually get less HP per level, because you would have to figure out how much HP you get for that level, then -1 off of it, or -2 if you have a negative attribute modifier. For example, in Wisdom, you can see that I have a -1, so that's kind of how it would look on your character in Baldur's Gate 3. Now, let's move on to initiative. There's not every single stat is going to be affecting other stats on your character sheet. While they will always affect skills in some way, because pretty much every skill is tied to a certain attribute, there is not a lot of other attributes outside of Dex that affect other things on your character sheet or your character overall. And Dex is one of those things. So Dex is going to change your initiative. What is initiative? Initiative is how turn order is decided in the game. When you start combat, every time you start combat, you're going to be rolling a dice in game, and then you're going to be adding your initiative to that dice, and whoever has the highest is going to be the one that goes first. Now, we've talked about rolling a bit here and there, talking about rolling d12s, rolling d10s, rolling d6s, depending on what your HP is for the class that you have. A lot of things that happen in game are often decided by dice. The most important dice that's in the game is probably the 20-sided dice, or its nickname, a d20. So for example, when you're rolling initiative, you roll a d20, you roll a 20-sided dice, and then for this character, if I were playing them, I would add a +1. So if I rolled a 13 and had that +1, my initiative would be 14. And anyone who has lower initiative than 14 will be going after I make my turn. But going back to rolling is pretty much in every part of the game. You're going to be using the d20 more than any other dice in the game, because anything from saving throws to skills to attacks are all going to be using a d20. So for example, if you were to attack with a fighter, now this isn't a fighter, this is a wizard, so it's going to be a little bit different from this character sheet. A fighter would roll a d20, so then let's say it has a +4 to attack. We'll say that our fighter has 2 in strength and has a 2 proficiency bonus. That means that he'll roll a +4. And so he'll roll that d20 +4 against their defenses, and he'll have to get higher than their armor class to hit. Or if it's a skill check, for example, it could be a d20 +5, because let's say they are doing con, right? And they have a slightly higher con bonus, and you're doing some kind of skill check that involves con or some kind of save, it'll be slightly higher if you have that and a proficiency bonus into it. Now, we've talked about proficiency bonuses a bit here. I've dropped it around as we're going through like the different things that are on a character sheet and the different things that involve your character in Baldur's Gate 3. So let's go over that now. Proficiency bonuses is pretty much an extra stat that you get if you are proficient in anything. And that could be proficient in a particular type of saving throw versus magics or traps. That could be being proficient in a certain type of weapon, and that could be proficient in a certain type of skill as well. And starting off at level 1, your proficiency bonus is +2. And as you level up through the game, your total level increases, whether you multi-class or not. Your total level is what dictates what kind of proficiency bonus you have. So for example, in this wizard character that I have right here, he's level 8, and that makes his proficiency bonus level 3. I forget the exact level in which your proficiency bonus goes up, but it's all at the same level for every single class that you have, and it's just a total level collective. Now let's talk about AC, or armor class, and Dex, and how those two things factor into each other. AC, or armor class, is what determines if a character is able to hit you, or if you're able to hit someone else. So let's say that I have 15 AC, or in this case, I guess I have 16 AC on this character. Someone rolls an attack versus me, and they hit 15. That means that they don't hit me because my armor class is higher than the number that they just rolled for an attack. Now, if they were to roll a 16 versus this character, they would hit, and then they would have to roll for damage to see how much damage they've done, unless I'm able to do something to prevent it. AC, or armor class, can be raised in many different ways, whether that be through armors that you buy or acquire, or dexterity being raised. Now, not every single armor can have the bonus of dexterity on top of it. So for example, if I was at 10 AC, 10 armor class, and I bought some studded leather, that would raise my dex to, or my AC to 12. And it would also be increased by my attribute modifier as dex. So for example, I have 12 dexterity, that puts me in the +1 category, so that means I would add an additional 1 on top of that studded leather armor, so I would have 13 AC overall. But let's say I wanted to get something like chainmail, which is heavy armor. Now normally I wouldn't even be able to wear heavy armor because there's certain requirements to be able to do that. But let's say that I did. Chainmail would raise my AC to 16. But I could not add any dex onto it because it's not a type of armor that takes in the advantages of having high dexterity. And while your dexterity can still be applied in other ways through skills or through saves and things like that, it will no longer be applied to your armor class. And while you might say, why doesn't everyone wear chainmail? Because it has higher AC. Well, it does come with certain disadvantages. Like I said earlier, there is a strength requirement for this to wear it, and you have to be proficient in it, or it comes with other negatives. And another big thing on top of that is if you are a stealthing character, or you're trying to be sneaky in any way, because it's a large, bulky armor that makes a lot of noise, you get disadvantaged on stealth checks. So disadvantage and advantage are two things that also exist in the game, and all that means is that when you have advantage, you roll 2 dice and you take the highest one, so it's better for you, or if you have disadvantage, you roll 2 dice and you take the lowest one. So you really don't want to have disadvantage whenever you can avoid it. Now, let's go over spells. Spells can be fairly complicated, especially for a new time player. It's not as easy as, say, a melee class or something like that. We're going to go into spells, and you're going to see a lot of different spells in here, but don't be overwhelmed. These are just all the spells that I have written inside this character sheet. Normally in game, you would not see something like this because they would be on a bar that you can manage instead, and it would be a lot easier to tell the difference. So here we go. I've minimized down all my spell descriptions, so it's a lot easier to tell. Every spell casting class has cantrips and spells known to them. Usually a limited amount of cantrips that you know, and you usually get more as you go on, unless you find them in spells or scrolls for you to be able to learn. And cantrips have unlimited uses and require an action to do. So for example, Firebolt would require a whole action, and I'm able to use it, but as you can see, Firebolt doesn't have a number next to the type of spells that I'm able to use. It's just cantrips, and that's because cantrips have unlimited uses. You can use them forever, and you'll never run out of cantrips. When you're using a cantrip, they usually deal damage or have some other effect that you can do, or bonus to your party members. Now, if they do damage, there's usually 2 types of way that they do damage. One of those ways is you do a spell casting attack roll, which is much like a melee roll, except it uses your spell casting modifier rather than strength or dex. And then the other one is spell save DC. So if you have a spell save DC, what it means is that the enemy that you're attacking has to make a spell save against your spell save DC. My spell save DC is 16 on this character. That's calculating by doing a little small amount of math, which I believe is 8 plus your proficiency bonus, and then plus your spell casting modifier. So for example, I have 5 in int, 3 proficiency bonus, and then plus 8 gives me 16. So if I were to cast a cantrip that requires them to make a spell save DC, which is 16, and they hit a 15, they will take the full damage of whatever I roll. But if it's 16 and they roll a 17, I do 0 damage to them. So there is a downside when you're using cantrips that possibly when you use them, they'll take no damage. However, spell slots are a little bit more complicated than cantrips. They are not unlimited. You have a set amount of spell slots depending on what level you are. So for an example, we'll use a cleric at level 3. A cleric at level 3 would have access to be able to cast 4 level 1 spells per day and 2 level 2 spells per day. So that means they can cast 2 2-level spells and 4 level 1 spells before needing to rest. However, there's a small caveat outside of that, and that is you can upcast spells. So even though you only can cast 4 level 1 spells, technically you can grab a level 1 spell and upcast it to level 2 and use a level 2 spell slot instead. So you could cast 6 level 1 spells, but 2 of them as level 2. Which this is what gives casters a lot of versatility, because they can take a low level healing spell and make it better if they don't get another better healing spell at level 2 or at level 3. They can just upcast their lower level spells. So with all this knowledge together, let's go over a combat round that you can kind of know what's going to happen in Baldur's Gate 3 when you first get involved in combat. First, combat begins, and this means that you roll initiative. So let's say that you roll initiative and you roll a 15 and a goblin comes at you and he also rolls initiative and he rolls a 14. This means that you get to go first because you rolled higher initiative. You have a total of 3 actions that you can do when you are in combat and it's your turn, and those actions are an attack action, a move action, and a bonus action. There's also a reaction, but you don't get that on your turn normally. It's usually something that happens not on your turn. So let's say you start your turn and you want to do your move action. So we'll go back to speed for a little bit, and on this character, and on most characters, you'll probably have 30 speed unless you're playing a race or class that increases your movement speed. So I have 30 speed, so I'm allowed to move 30 feet. Well, that gets me in range of the goblin. So now I'm able to attack the goblin. And on this fighter, let's say I have a +5 to hit. So I roll a d20, a 20-sided dice, and I add +5 to that. And I rolled a 13. So 13 plus 5 would mean that I hit for a total of 18. And the goblin only has 15 armor class. So that means I hit the goblin. So it's time to roll damage. Now we haven't gone over damage too much and how damage is calculated. And depending on what kind of weapon you're using, it'll have a different roll. And depending what kind of spell you're using, it'll also have a different roll. Especially if you've upcasted it to do more damage, you might have an additional dice to roll on your damage. But for example, in this, we're going to be using a longsword. And a longsword, when equipped with one hand, does 1d8 damage. And we'll also have +3 for our strength modifier on this person. So let's say we rolled 7 damage. We had a +3. That means that we did a total of 10 damage. And since the goblin has less than 10 HP, it dies. Now, I've did all these actions and I've taken out the goblin, but I do still have a bonus action left. Now, are there things that I could do with that bonus action this turn as a fighter at low level? Yeah, you probably could do something like Second Wind, which restores your HP, but because I haven't taken any damage, I'm just not going to use that bonus action. Now, if I was like a dual-wielding fighter, I could use my secondary attack as a bonus action in my offhand, which will be harder to hit and do less damage unless you have special bonuses or feats for it. But normally, you're not going to be using your bonus action unless you specifically have an ability that you want to use that uses a bonus action, or you have a spell that uses a bonus action. And that's it. That's pretty much how a round of combat would go. And if they're still alive, then the goblin would still get its turn to attack me. It would have to beat my AC to be able to do damage. And if it does, it would do damage, and we go back and forth until one of us is down. And that's the end of the battle. Now, I didn't slightly mention reactions. Reactions are usually, like I said, something that happens outside of combat. So, for example, there is a spell that a wizard could have. We can actually look at it here. And that's Shield. So Shield is a aberration casting spell or type of class of magic. All magics have different type of classes. Overall, it doesn't really matter unless you are in that school of class. Sometimes it has special bonuses, but that's not something that really needs to be known. for the basics of Baldur's Gate 3. So, for example, this is a spell that uses a reaction, and it would be something outside of your turn. So, if someone, say, hit me with a missile weapon, so someone hits me with an arrow, and they hit my AC, and they go 1 over my AC, or they meet my AC exactly, so they are able to hit me. As a reaction, I can burn a level 1 spell slot to cast Shield to make my AC go up by 5. And so if I had 16 AC and they rolled 16 against me, now I have 21 AC for that attack, and so they cannot hit me. So that's one way that you can use a reaction. And then for bonus actions, like I've already gave a few examples for that, so I don't think I need to add in more to that. And I think that's pretty much it for like the basics of Baldur's Gate 3 and the stuff that you'll kind of have to know from coming from D&D type related games, games that use these kinds of systems. I did mention saving throws a little bit, but they are much like skills in themselves, where if you have a saving throw, a spell that you need to make against something or some kind of trap, if you're proficient in it, you get your proficiency bonus, and it's based off your attribute bonus score as well. And same things with skills. Skills are mostly done out of combat, not really done during combat usually, usually beforehand or in some kind of conversation. And it's the same thing. If you're proficient in it, you get the proficiency bonus, and it is based off the bonus that you have from what your stats are. So for an Arcana on this character, which is a wizard, I have 5 intelligence and 3 proficiency bonus because I'm proficient in it. And so I get to add a +8 to my roll. But that's pretty much it. I hope that it helped you understand some basics of Baldur's Gate 3 if you've never played a Baldur's Gate game and you don't really have a lot of experience with D&D. But anyways, that's it. Have a nice day.